The illusion of transparency. The illusion of transparency is when you overestimate how much others can gauge your internal states. For example, thinking people can tell how nervous you are during a presentation. This happens because we are highly aware of our own emotions and often assume others can pick up on them easily. To counter this, remind yourself that others are less aware of your internal struggles than you think. Practice self-compassion and realize that people are generally focused on their own thoughts and feelings rather than scrutinizing yours. The empathy gap. The empathy gap happens when you don't realize how your emotions, like hunger, anger, or pain, affect your decisions. For example, if you go grocery shopping while you're hungry, you might buy more than you need. To avoid this, notice when your feelings might be influencing your choices. Try to make decisions when you're calm and neutral. Use strategies like taking a moment to think before deciding, or asking someone else for their opinion when you're feeling emotional. The Ostrich Effect. The Ostrich Effect is a term used to describe how people avoid bad news. It's like saying they bury their heads in the sand like an ostrich, hoping their problems will go away. This means people might ignore or avoid dealing with problems or uncomfortable situations to feel less anxious or stressed. For example, avoiding checking your bank account statement because you fear the high balance. To counter this, make it a habit to review your financial status regularly so you can deal with these things before they snowball. Survivorship Bias. Survivorship bias is focusing on successful outcomes and ignoring the failures. Imagine you're looking at a group of successful entrepreneurs. You notice that many of them dropped out of college. You might think, dropping out of college is the key to becoming successful. However, you're only looking at the successful ones who dropped out. You're not considering the many others who dropped out and didn't become successful. Always consider what you're not seeing. Ask, what about those who didn't make it? This avoids decisions based on incomplete info. Whether studying businesses, athletes, or any group, get data on those who didn't succeed as well. Look into both successes and failures to get a complete picture. The Hot-Hand Fallacy. The Hot-Hand Fallacy is when you believe that someone who has been successful recently is more likely to keep succeeding. For example, thinking that a salesperson who has closed several deals in a row will definitely close the next one. This belief comes from our tendency to see patterns in random events. Each event is independent and not necessarily influenced by past successes. Understanding probability and randomness can help us make more rational decisions. The Contrast Effect. The contrast effect occurs when your judgment is influenced by comparing something with something else. Ever notice how car salespeople show you a clunker before presenting the amazing new car they want to sell? It's a trick. They're using the contrast effect to make the new car look even better. Be aware of this in marketing so you don't get fooled when comparing products. Chauffeur Knowledge. Chauffeur knowledge refers to someone appearing knowledgeable without truly understanding, much like a parrot repeating phrases. For example, consider a person who uses fancy words but doesn't really understand what they're talking about. Don't be afraid to ask deeper questions and seek explanations to see if they're actually understanding what they're saying. Illusion of averages. The illusion of averages is the mistaken belief that average figures accurately represent the experiences of individuals within a group. For example, suppose you hear that the average test score in a class is 85%. You might assume that most students scored around 85%. However, this average could be affected by a few students who scored very high and several who scored much lower. The average score doesn't reflect the true performance spread of the students. Always look beyond the averages. Think about the different scores, how they're spread out, and other numbers to see the whole picture. This will help you make better and more accurate decisions. The Curse of Specificity. The curse of specificity is when detailed information seems more convincing even if it's not relevant. Sometimes a simple explanation is best. Imagine a friend trying to convince you of a movie by describing every single scene. Information overload. Focus on the key points to keep your audience engaged and avoid getting bogged down in irrelevant details. Inability to close doors. The inability to close doors is the struggle to make decisions due to the fear of missing out on other opportunities. It's like keeping all the doors open instead of closing some. For example, Picture yourself working on 3 business ideas simultaneously. You know that focusing on just one would be more productive, but you don't want to miss out on the progress of the other 2. This might leave you scattered and burnt out, often leading to mediocre outcomes or no progress at all. Focus on one thing at a time and watch your quality improve. The Spotlight Effect. The Spotlight Effect is the belief that others notice your appearance or mistakes more than they actually do. Think of it this way. Are you spending all day critiquing other people's outfits? Probably not. Remind yourself that most people are usually more focused on themselves, so take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy being yourself. The Halo Effect. The halo effect is when one positive trait influences your overall opinion of someone. Just because someone is charming doesn't mean they have good intentions or are trustworthy. We can be tricked by positive first impressions into overlooking potential downsides. Evaluate situations and people on their own merits, not first impressions. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is the sense of obligation to return a favor when someone does something for you. For example, you might feel compelled to buy a product after receiving a free sample. That free cookie at the store is a tactic designed to get you browsing and spending more. Be aware of when you're being influenced by a perceived obligation rather than genuine desire. The Mere Exposure Effect. The mere exposure effect happens when seeing or hearing something repeatedly makes you like it more. For example, hearing a song on the radio many times and eventually liking it. This effect can shape our preferences and choices without us noticing. Be mindful of the bias when making decisions, especially in marketing and advertising. To counteract it, try new experiences and seek out different perspectives. Self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is when you take credit for success but blame external factors for failures. For instance, if you ace an exam, you might attribute it to your hard work and intelligence. But if you do poorly, you might blame the teacher for making the test too hard or the noisy room for distracting you. To avoid this bias, practice taking responsibility for your own actions in both your successes and failures. This will help you learn and get better. The Anchoring Effect. The anchoring effect is when your decisions are influenced by an initial piece of information. For example, when buying a dress, if you first see a dress priced at $500, you might think that a $300 dress is a bargain, even if it's still expensive. The initial $500 price sets an anchor that makes other prices seem more reasonable by comparison. This can lead you to spend more than you originally intended. Always look at offers and decisions independently, not just in comparison to the first option you see. Negativity bias. Negativity bias is the tendency to focus more on negative events than positive ones. For example, you might fixate on a single negative comment even after receiving 100 positive ones. To counter this, shift your perspective to focus on positive events and practice gratitude. The Sunk Cost Fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is when you continue an activity or project because you've already invested time, money, or effort into it, rather than because it is currently beneficial. This is like continuing to eat a terrible meal just because you paid for it. Consider what the best action is moving forward. Your decisions should be based on potential future benefits rather than past costs. The Paradox of Choice. The paradox of choice is the difficulty in making a decision when faced with too many options. For example, choosing a dish from a menu with hundreds of items can be overwhelming and make it hard to decide what to eat. Narrow down your options and those you offer to others. For example, if you're selling 3 products, highlighting the best-selling one can simplify the decision-making process and boost the chances of making a sale. The Framing Effect. The framing effect occurs when your decision is influenced by how information is presented. For example, imagine a car company advertises that their cars have 98% safety rating. But now imagine they say that 2 out of every 100 cars have a safety failure. Both statements mean the same thing, but the second one sounds much worse. Always consider information from different perspectives before making a decision. The Curse of Knowledge. The curse of knowledge occurs when you assume that others have the same level of understanding as you do, leading to confusion and miscommunication. This often happens when using technical jargon or complex concepts with someone unfamiliar with the topic. To avoid this, simplify your explanations and consider your audience's perspective. Imagine you're explaining it to a younger version of yourself who is just starting to learn. By doing so, you can make your communication clearer and more effective. The Pygmalion Effect. The Pygmalion Effect happens when high expectations lead to better performance. For example, if a teacher believes a student will do well, the student often performs better. This shows how powerful positive expectations can be. To use this effect for yourself, set high but realistic goals. Believe in your ability to succeed, and you'll likely see better results. High expectations can motivate you to achieve more. Consistency Principle. The consistency principle is the desire to stick to what you've said or done before. For example, if you tell your friends you'll exercise 3 times a week, you're more likely to do it to stay true to your word. This principle helps you keep promises and follow through on your plans. To use this, share your goals with others. This makes you more likely to achieve them. The Planning Fallacy. The planning fallacy is when you underestimate how long a task will take to complete. For example, you might think you can write a report in 1 hour, but it actually takes 3 hours. To avoid this, consider past experiences and add extra time to your estimates. Break down the task into smaller steps and assess how long each part will realistically take. This helps ensure you have enough time to finish your tasks without rushing. Confirmation Bias. Confirmation bias is focusing only on information that supports your existing beliefs. For instance, only reading news that aligns with your political views. This can limit your understanding and reinforce your biases. To avoid this, try and find information that challenges your beliefs. Challenge yourself by seeking out information that opposes your beliefs to get a balanced perspective. The Bandwagon Effect. The bandwagon effect is when you follow what others are doing. For example, if all your friends start using a new social media app, you might join in just because they are. To avoid this, make decisions based on your own likes and values. Think about whether you really enjoy something, or are you just following the crowd. By staying true to yourself, you can avoid being influenced by the bandwagon effect. The Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is valuing something more just because you own it. For example, holding on to old gadgets that you no longer use. To avoid this, try to see your possessions from an outsider's perspective and evaluate their actual usefulness. Action Bias. Action bias is when we prefer to do something rather than nothing, even if doing nothing is better. This bias occurs because taking action often makes us feel more in control and productive, even if the actions are not helpful or necessary. For example, during the UEFA Euro Cup, a coach might keep changing players' positions after a few losses, looking for a quick fix. These constant changes can hurt team performance. Sometimes sticking to the original plan works better. Recognizing action bias is crucial, as it helps us understand when patience and inaction might be more beneficial than impulsive actions. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is when people who aren't very skilled at something think they're much better than they really are. For example, someone who just started cooking might believe they can make gourmet dishes, even though they still have a lot to learn. This effect makes it hard for people to see their own mistakes and improve. To avoid this, stay humble, keep learning, and seek feedback from others. This helps you see your true skill level and continue to grow. The Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon. The Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon, also known as frequency illusion, is when you notice something new and then start seeing it everywhere. For example, learning a new word and suddenly seeing it in different places. This occurs because our brains are good at spotting patterns and noticing things that are relevant to us. To counter this, understand that this increased frequency is a cognitive bias, not always an accurate reflection of reality. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is the tendency for people to prefer avoiding losses rather than acquiring equivalent gains. For instance, losing $20 feels worse than the pleasure of finding $20. This can lead to excessive caution and risk aversion. To deal with this, Try to think about the possible good outcomes as well as the bad ones. This can help you make better choices and not miss out on good opportunities. The IKEA Effect. The IKEA Effect is the phenomenon of valuing something more because you had a hand in creating it, like that wonky bookshelf you assembled yourself. Just because you wrestled with Allen keys doesn't mean it's a masterpiece. Get honest feedback from others to avoid overvaluing your efforts. The Decoy Effect. The decoy effect occurs when people's preferences change due to the introduction of a third option, the decoy, which is asymmetrically dominated. For example, at the movies, you have 3 popcorn choices: small for $3, medium for $6.50, and large for $7. Without the medium option, most people might choose the small size because it's cheaper. However, with the medium option present, the large size seems like a much better deal for just 50 cents more. This often leads people to choose the large size. Here, the medium size is the decoy, making the large size look more attractive even though the small size might have been preferable without it. The Availability Heuristic. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut where people rely on immediate examples that come to mind when making decisions. This often leads them to overestimate how common or important those examples are. Imagine you're deciding whether to fly or drive for your next vacation. Recently, you heard about a plane crash on the news. Because this event is fresh in your mind, you think plane crashes are common and decide to drive, even though statistically, flying is much safer than driving. To avoid this, check for real facts and statistics before making a decision. The Diderot Effect. The Diderot Effect is when acquiring a new item leads to additional purchases. For example, buying a new phone and then feeling the need to get matching accessories. Be mindful of how one purchase can influence your overall spending. The Bystander Effect. The Bystander Effect is the reduced likelihood of helping someone in need when others are present. For example, you might not help in a public emergency because you think someone else will. To counter this, take personal responsibility and act when you see someone in need, regardless of the crowd around you. The Gambler's Fallacy. The Gambler's Fallacy is believing that past events affect the probability of future ones in random situations. For example, thinking that a coin is due to land heads after several tails. Remember, each event is independent in random scenarios. Hindsight Bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to see events as having been predictable after they have already happened. For example, claiming you knew a team would win after the match is over. Recognize this bias and be honest about what you truly knew before the event. The Unity Principle. The Unity Principle is about our tendency to favor and feel closer to people who we perceive as part of our group. For example, trusting a recommendation from someone who shares your interests or background. Imagine you're in the market for a new laptop. A friend from your same hometown who also loves gaming like you recommends a specific model. Even though there are many reviews online, you're more likely to trust your friend's suggestion because you identify with them and share common interests. Be aware of this bias when making decisions. Consider recommendations objectively and evaluate all available information to make the best choice, not just those from people you identify with. This ensures more balanced and informed decisions. Reactance Bias. Reactance bias is the urge to do the opposite of what someone tells you to maintain your freedom. For example, wanting to break a diet just because someone commented on it. Focus on your own goals and the reasons behind them, rather than reacting to others' comments. The Zeigarnik Effect. The Zeigarnik Effect is the tendency to remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. For example, you start writing an email but get interrupted and can't finish it. You're likely to keep thinking about that unfinished email until you complete it, whereas you might quickly forget about an email you've already sent. Use this effect to your advantage by breaking large tasks into smaller, unfinished segments. This keeps them fresh in your mind and helps you stay motivated to complete them. It's also useful for studying or working on projects, as leaving tasks unfinished can prompt you to come back and complete them. The Ambiguity Effect. The ambiguity effect is the tendency to avoid choices with uncertain outcomes. For example, sticking to familiar products instead of trying new ones. Imagine you're choosing between 2 restaurants. One is a popular chain you've been to many times, and the other is a new place with no reviews. You might choose the chain restaurant simply because you know what to expect, even if the new place could be better. Be aware of this bias when making decisions. Sometimes exploring options with unknown outcomes can lead to better experiences and opportunities. Don't let the fear of the unknown hold you back from trying something new. The end of history illusion. The end of history illusion is believing that your current self is the final version of you and that you won't change much in the future. To counter this, remember that change is constant. Think about how much you've changed in the past and know that your future self will continue to grow. Embrace this idea to stay open to new experiences and opportunities for personal development. Have you ever noticed yourself falling into any of these psychological traps? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember, these psychological traps are just that, traps. But with a little awareness and effort, we can avoid them and make smarter choices. The more you understand how your mind works, the better equipped you'll be to spot these traps. If something feels off, it probably is. Thanks for watching.